There we go. It's getting recorded.
Right. Well, Ingmar, this has been fascinating. So, so just to put this in context, Ingmar and I were connecting after a very, very long time and just sharing our life journeys. And, there's so much beauty and power and wisdom in this conversation that I thought, well, why don't we just record it and then allow this to be shared with those who could also relate to this and benefit from this and feel, something that's bigger than any of us individually, that's wanting to get embodied right now.
Mm.
So just start us off, Ingmar.
Start us off, yeah. We like Kiara said, we haven't connected for a long time, and in the meantime, I think we both went through a lot and a lot of changes. And recently, I saw a video of Kiara talking about his new book and about Kashmir Shaivism, and it's something that that has caught my interest as well the last 2 years, actually 2 years ago, more or less. And so I really felt the urge, the impulse to connect with Kiara and talk about this. And well, we just shared a bit our own experiences and our views on well, we already went deep. We talked about God, we talked about Vedanta, we talked about Kashmir Shaivism, and we ended up at Gnosticism even at this point when you said maybe we should record something of this. Huh?
Yeah, so, bringing it all together, I feel like so many of us get caught up in ideas of God, ideas of reality. And it's usually even ideas about God can be very dualistic. And it's interesting in Vedanta, we were talking about Vedanta earlier, that, there's this idea that there's only one reality, and this apparent reality is an illusion, which itself is a form of duality. So obviously, there's something missing in that, and Kashmir Shaivism seems to fill in the missing pieces. Yes, this is all divine, this is all Shiva, but the expression of Shiva as it manifests into the world is multidimensional reality as we experience it. And it's not separate. Like Shiva and Shakti are simply two faces of the same reality. One is still and needs to hold that stillness, and the other is this infinite power, infinite creativity that manifests in so many different ways, creating worlds and universes and new choices and possibilities. And choice, we talked about choice as key.
Yes.
So what is choice really? And most of us go around thinking that we have a choice when really it's nothing more than conditioning. We think we have a choice, but it's our habit patterns from the past. It's our memories that hold on to trauma that creates the illusion of making a choice. And that's why so many of us go through so much suffering, because then we think that, oh my God, I'm stuck. I don't have a choice. I don't have a way out. I'm helpless. I'm a victim of the universe. And so we spoke about, how Rumi, he speaks about this threefold path of awakening, referring to a journey of enlightenment. So the first step is the drop, seeking to merge into the ocean. So I'm identified with the drop, with the personal self. I'm struggling, I'm striving, I'm efforting, I'm seeking for something outside of me to give meaning to my life. Yes. Eventually, he says, okay, we join the great ocean, we become one, we merge, we experience identity with the universal self. And many refer to this as enlightenment. All right, fine. But then he says there's a third step. And that's when the entire ocean starts entering into the drop, begins to permeate the drop, move through the drop, create through the drop. So the personal self and the divine self, or the universal self, are not separate. They are meant to act in concert together. And when that happens, then we have choice. Because the choice then doesn't come from the stories of our lives. It doesn't come from the identity with the imbalances. It comes from the divine, which is universal and has its own evolutionary purpose moving through us. So this great ocean then moves us into the next, whatever the next step is. And we may not understand, but the river knows, the ocean knows.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a quote that I recently found of Carl Jung, where he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Which kind of touches what we're talking about, because fate means that we have no choice in a sense, and fate means that things just happen to us. It's supposed to be like this. It's God's will, or whatever it may be.
Resign yourself to it. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the idea of kismet is fate. You resign yourself to it, whether you like it or not. But then you mentioned another term which I like, maktub.
Maktub.
You want to speak about that?
Yeah, this is, I mentioned to Kiara, I was talking to a friend, I saw a post of a friend of mine in Japan who's a spiritual teacher, and he was talking about this concept of, do we have any influence on our future, or is everything, predetermined by a God or a higher force? And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the term maktub, which means it has been written, it has written. And it talks about this concept that everything that will ever happen is already known, and in a sense even has already happened in that sense. And I think this touches a little bit what Kiara just said about Rumi, the third step, where he talks about the ocean is manifesting itself through the drop of the ocean. So we have this concept within Vedanta, within several non-dual philosophies, that we are this vast, edgeless, boundless space that is our awareness. And this awareness has the unique capacity of being aware of itself. And it's, let's call it a meta awareness. And then we have all these people that are separate selves. They are dissociated parts of this meta awareness. And there's this idea that awareness, or God, or meta awareness, works through these separate selves. And in there we have the creative principle. There we have the world, or God, unfolding himself in this evolutionary process of constant potentiality, creative potentiality, which is Shakti, that you just called the principle of Shakti. In Gnosticism, they call it Sophia. But at the same time, all these separate selves and everything that we see as separate from ourselves, the world, which in Vedanta they say is an illusion, appears within us, appears within this meta-awareness. So it's an implosion. It's like an image folding into itself, and at the same time expanding in this crazy cymatic geometrical patterns, which is very hard to contain, I think, with our
well, that's the concept the Mahayana Buddhists talk about, Indra's net. So that's where they say that the universe is like a string of pearls. Each pearl reflects every other pearl. It contains every other pearl. In fact, it is every other pearl.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's the fractal nature of the universe. And in fact, what it reminds me of, when you mentioned the word maktub, I remember that from Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist.
Yes.
And and the one thing about alchemy to me, it's, if you simplify it right down to its essence, as above, so below, as within, so without. Once we really understand that, there's nothing that can limit us, nothing that can push us off center. There's nothing that can inhibit us from expressing the truth of who we are. Because there's nothing, the idea of dark and light is what keeps us entrapped.
Yeah, but also
And
this concept, I think, and this is something where we really need to be careful, is when we talk about us or when we talk about the self. Um, a very famous quote from Christ, for example, is where he said, "Only through me, you
yeah.
can reach the Father. Only through me." But he wasn't talking about the person. He was
Yeah.
talking about the transpersonal. He was talking about that, what is his true nature.
Right.
And I also think when we talk about, we touched about this a little bit before, when we know our animalistic nature, our impulses that just happen, our instinctive impulses in our bodies, lust, jealousy, greed, these qualities of our animalistic part of our human nature, we can reach mastery over this. We can see through this, which implies a freedom of choice. But we can only see this when we see it, because when we don't see it, it's unconscious and it controls us. And this leads to this quote of Carl Jung, where he says, then we see fate. Then we think that there's something outside us determining our fate. Well, in reality, it is not outside us; it is inside us.
Yeah,
That is determining our fate.
that's the understanding where kismet, which is fate, becomes maktub. That's when you're writing your destiny, because you are not there. I think, and that's the tricky part for many of us, or most of us, actually. We've made a habit of identifying with this personal self. So when I speak about me, us, I'm speaking of the drop, the separate self.
Exactly.
Whereas the truth is, and this is what you've realized, what many of us are realizing or are learning to identify with, is that the ocean is now moving through the drop, creating new worlds, dimensions, new potentialities, and the drop is simply surrendering. Like Shakti is surrendering to Shiva, Shiva is surrendering to Shakti, both ways. And this entire play of life is so filled with nuance. And so try and understand that with the thinking mind. We're going to create these separations. We're going to create an illusion of dark and light to try and relate to this. But if you don't need to do it that way, if you can access something beyond the thinking mind, of course, that happens through the heart, a deep level of the heart, not just the emotional heart, but an intuitive heart that connects with the spiritual self, which connects with soul, which is who we are. Then there's no differentiation between maktub and kismet, or fate and predestination. Then it's like it's all one, because there's only the flow. There's only this moment. No cause and effect, no trying to achieve something, no trying to heal anything from the past. There's freedom.
It is. And yet, I think when you start to listen to the heart, you will heal and you will affect whatever is happening anyway, even though, because in my realization was twofold. 15 years ago, it was realizing that I am not this person. I this person, which I call the mind cloud, is just a collection of ideas and concepts and everything. And it was such a dissociative experience that even the movement of my body, it seemed like it was just happening completely on its own merit, by itself, in its own volition. And there was nothing there that was controlling this body. At least it wasn't me. And then
this year.
Sorry?
It wasn't the the Ingmar you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like this. It became apparent that this concept of myself was never me in the first place, and it was this this sense of I amness that everybody experiences, literally everybody. And this is also something that I think we should talk about, is when we connect to others and you really want to feel compassion, is you really connect to the I amness that somebody else has, and realize that also this person is being controlled by these concepts and these beliefs and these conditioning that they received in their lives from their family and friends and society and culture, etc. The second stage of that is that all of a sudden this realization somehow sinks into the heart. And in my case, it had to do with a breaking of the heart. And I read a really nice Sufi quote about this, which I cannot remember who said it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like you have to break the heart over and over and over and over again to be able to experience God, to be able to know God intimately.
Well, Khalil Gibran says something about that in The Prophet. He says
I think it's why
about...
Mother Teresa asked for the suffering all the time. Give me the suffering, give me the pain, because, you know, when we feel happy, when we think we feel happy, we don't pray, we don't long for God, we don't want to change things, you know. It's only in those hard moments that we become really close to God, and that he also seems far away. If but it is interesting, this concept, and we just touched on Kashmir Shaivism and Gnosticism, how much there is an overlap in these two, and this is also one of the reasons why I really like to talk to Kiara this time, because of his book that he wrote about ISSA, having traveled through Kashmir. When I first came into contact with Gnosticism and Gnosticism, I live in a region where the Cathars used to live, and they have a similar philosophy. They talk about Sophia being the creative principle that, if you translated it, would be wisdom. In Shaivism, they talk about Shakti. In the stories, Shakti had to separate from Shiva, turning into Durga, to create the world as we know it, and Sophia had to separate herself from the Father, chose also to be loose from that, to be separated from that, and from that came not Durga but the demiurge, and both are
Kali.
Yeah, both are dualistic if you look at it from the perspective of a separate self, because a separate self is a result of it. Because when there's a world of things and we start naming those things, we start conceptualizing these things, that's a tree, that's a bird, that's a plane, that's a flower, we create separation. It means there's a me and there's a flower. There's a separate thing that is considered a person, and there's something outside of me that's considered a flower or a bird. And I think J. Krishnamurti said it once: if you teach the child the name of the bird, it will never see the bird again. It really catches this principle of that.
That's a really profound statement.
It is.
And I think that's what happens when in our educational system, you know, we are so intent on teaching them the names and all the characteristics and the botanical forms. You know, they lose the magic and they forget how to play. Play means you're relating to, well, what Thich Nhat Hanh refers to as interbeing. You're interbeing with something. You're not seeing that something is outside of you. You know, so soon as we start talking about numbers and names and, you know, species and genuses, you know, the name of a tree or a bird, then we've lost that interbeing.
Yes. There's I think a meditative exercise that comes from Kashmir Shaivism is when you walk outside, for example, and whether it is you're walking your dog or just taking a stroll, is when you look at a tree, it's in a fraction of a second, the mind will say tree, or it will say beautiful tree or pretty tree or nice tree or ugly tree or dead tree or burning tree or whatever it is. But if you somehow can keep the gaze moving from object to object in such a fluid, flowing speed that the mind cannot keep up by naming it, you get sucked into this moment and you can experience this true nature that we are. You can experience this silence that we are, and this non-conceptualized being that we all share. And that's where we can really connect on a different level.
Beautiful. So tell me, so what happens when you find yourself distracted, when you find yourself going through suffering, agony, fear, pain, and start identifying with it? How do you bring yourself back into this state of flow, into this beingness?
Well, I mean, it not only happens with suffering, because I have often the experience when I'm walking through nature, for example, and I do this walking meditation where I become aware of being aware, and I'm just, you know, abiding in this, what I call my true nature. My heart just cracks open, this love pours out, and then the mind immediately says, oh my God, this is a lot of love, you know. And that's when I'm already out of it, you know. It's like when the mind interferes, it's gone.
Exactly.
So it's not only with suffering and pain and things like that. But what I've learned to realize is that when there's pain, the suffering is only there when you resist it, when you would like to change it. I need to get out of this feeling. I need to change something about this. I need to make something different in my life. That's when the suffering comes. And that's where the mind says, there has to be done something about this. The moment you let the suffering just be, and you open your heart to it, and you actually take it in, you will realize that the pain of suffering and actual love, they are quite close to each other. It's almost like they're part of the same coin. I remember once, this was during a workshop with you and Grace, and I think it was in Limburg in the Netherlands, somewhere in that little white church that you got.
Yes, maybe with Gerda and Leah.
Yes, and that at a certain point there were dikshas being given there, and that the whole group came into this experience of laughing and crying at the same time, deep grief and joy at the same time. It was the same thing, you know.
Yeah,
it was almost the same feeling, and I dare to say it was the same feeling almost. It was just the labels that we put on it are different.
That's the labels that create the suffering, in other words.
Exactly. So to answer your question, becoming aware of the labels really helps in these situations, bringing you back to yourself. But also, in a sense, I think if you just stay in the present moment and just be with whatever is happening, I realized that I can be in traffic and somebody can cut me off, and I can feel this anger coming up, and I'm like, you know, swearing for a few seconds, like, oh, this guy is not paying attention, and what is this? And then I continue, and a minute later it's gone, you know.
Well, what that also implies, Ingmar, is that you're not suppressing anything. You're not suppressing your irritation, your anger, because that's what some people do. Like, you know, we have this idea of spiritual behavior, where we have basically excised half of our emotional states. It's not okay to be angry, judgmental. It's not okay to be jealous, lustful. And then we overemphasize the other stuff. You know, I'm going to act kind and compassionate, even if I'm not feeling that. And then that creates a split inside, which then becomes, you know, another labeling. It's an internal labeling that we've done.
Yes, and so it gets power over us that way, because I mean, I remember when I was younger, I could be in a discussion with somebody and feel like I didn't say the right things in this conversation, and I could walk around with it for days. If only I had said this, if only I had said that. You know, I haven't had that experience for a long time. And but the idea that all these feelings and emotions disappear the moment you become aware of your separate self, of your separate nature, of your dissociated self, or the mind cloud, is an illusion in itself. I mean, the program just goes. It's a little bit weird to think that once the computer becomes aware of its programming, that the program is gone. No, the program is still there, but it
The
takes
program
time to
continues.
reprogram it, if you even
Yeah.
want to reprogram it, because this is where you made a good point, is that you don't even feel the need to change anything.
Well, at that point, just like what Rumi talks about as the ocean entering the drop. At that point, you don't have to even think about, well, so many of us identify with traumas or with limitations. At this point, you are not experiencing the personal self in such a way that you're even aware of those limitations or traumas. You simply become something so much vaster moving through, which is also at the same time all inclusive.
Yes.
So, we have this idea of dark versus light, and they're in this internal battle with each other. This is what, many of the dualistic traditions teach. But once you recognize that, the inclusiveness of the divine, there's no dark and light, there's no battle, then you can totally relax. Even so, let me ask you this question. So in the world today, we are going through major crises, we're going through major awakenings. It can be perceived as a battle of dark and light. And, so if you believe that darkness is winning, you would fall into a sense of hopelessness, depression, victimization. If you believe that light is winning, then you go into this sense of hope, maybe hopium. So how do you see what's happening in the world around us? So, we talked about the deep state. We talked about, the seeming struggle between two opposing points of view, which are trying to assert themselves, and humanity is caught in the struggle in between.
Yeah.
So in the Gnostic tradition, they talk about the demiurge, or they talk about the archons, they talk about these, or in the Hindu tradition, they talk about the asuras.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
So
Carl Jung called it demons, huh? Daimon.
Daimon, yeah.
Yeah, and
So there is a reality and there isn't a reality. So it's like it's both and.
Yeah.
So how do you relate to, how do you find resolution?
Well, I think that what you're saying is right. I think if you focus on fear, then or if you become afraid in these times, you will see all these things happening that are taking away our freedoms and health, and you see that control is becoming more and more apparent on a global scale, and you start seeing all this stuff. And I think this is just a result of the fact that we are not human beings with a consciousness. We are consciousness, and we contain all these human beings that are somehow dissociated from each other, from their own separate perspectives. And the world as we perceive it is just a result of our own internal evolution, which is, of course, the evolution of God itself. And I really like the idea of, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I believe that from my own experience, when it comes to becoming aware of who I really was, and then also becoming aware of the fact that this heart opening and this constantly breaking of the heart, and keeping this heart open for everything, also for the suffering in the world, etc., enables this love, this constant bliss, which is not at all like it is often described as this overwhelming experience of happiness, and no, it's a sweetness, it's honey that's just pouring out all the time. And I think this is God pouring himself out in the world. And I mentioned this a little bit. It's like that this love has no place to land. It wants to return to itself. God wants to love himself, wants to experience himself, but it cannot, because this love can only pour out, and it lands at other people. It lands in other people. But these other people are not separate from yourself on the most fundamental level. So this is how love returns to God. It returns to others. And when it comes to what's happening in the world, and I think we have the possibility to choose between good and bad, or as we perceive it, good and bad, even though on a most fundamental level, on the meta level, there is no difference between good and bad, because God or Shiva or the void is empty and completely filled at the same time. And this is what we touched on. If something is empty and completely filled at the same time, it cancels each other out, and you cannot experience either of it. Yeah, it's like a minus pole and a plus pole. It's like -1 + 1 is 0. So for God to enable God for himself to enable to experience himself, somehow these qualities that are pervading in this emptiness, in this void, in this fullness, need to be highlighted. And the only way to highlight this is through duality, through choice. And this is where we come in, where we can focus on either good or either the bad. I think from the perspective of God, it doesn't matter, but somehow it does matter. And somehow we do want to focus on the goods. And somehow I think—
Well, from the perspective of God, it's like watching a play or directing a play. You know, there's villains and there's heroes.
Yeah.
And it won't work without either. So it's like at the end of the play, there's a resolution. There comes to a point of, seeming crisis or drama, but that's all part of the play. And guess who wrote it in the first place? We wrote it, and we are playing it out. We are directing it. We are watching it. We are participating in it. Yeah. And I think that's the power and privilege of recognizing who we are as infinite consciousness. And one thing Sri Aurobindo says also, and you mentioned Carl Jung when he speaks about the unconscious, he refers to, or Sri Aurobindo refers to the inconscient, slightly different, even though the words sound the same. The inconscient is actually the womb of creation. It's what seems to be hidden away. It's not dark, it could also be light, because a lot of what's hidden away is light. We fail to notice our own beauty, our own power, our own unlimited potential. But when it's unconscious and hidden away, our journey is actually to go into that womb of creation, to go into that cave, to discover what has been hidden from us. That takes enormous courage, because the first layers that we're going to go through is what we've labeled the dark. And so whether it's our own personal darkness or the collective darkness, or even, an idea of universal darkness, we have to penetrate that. And then as we penetrate that, there's the recognition of who we are. And
I think this is really important, because now we talk about the embodiment of Christ. We talk about the embodiment of self-realization or enlightenment, or bringing the light in the body, because you mentioned it a little bit, in Gnosticism, they talk about the archons, and Jung talks about the daimon, the demons. I do think that if we look at these traditions, that there are forces that seem to be outside of us and working into us. In anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner also talked about it. But from the perspective of being this edgeless awareness in which everything appears and disappears, they exist inside us. And exactly. So if these forces exist inside us, they are part of us. They are part of God, so to say. But they are trying to, like children, to battle for our attention, And like they said, if you keep something in the dark, it will only grow stronger and it will start to rot, start to stink at a certain point, because still water is not drinkable, you know? And so we have to bring the light in and become aware of these forces that are part of us and that work into us and onto us. And I think this is what Kundalini Yoga is intended to do. Or if we talk about the archetypal yoga that I think in Kaula, the Kaula branch of Kashmir Shaivism, where they really do the embodiment of the deities is exactly this. It's the shadow work Jung is talking about.
Also, when I first went to Egypt, there was a recognition that all the gods and goddesses, they call them the nethers, they're actually aspects of herself. So I went through a journey of, okay, I'm going to understand who Osiris is until I can actually embody that quality in me. I'm going to understand who Nephthys is, Nut, and all of them, until I came to Set, because Set is, supposedly the dark god. And ultimately, as I began to explore his consciousness, I realized he was one of the most beautiful of all, because he was holding something that I needed to experience for myself, own for myself. Once I could own it as not something external to me, but as part of me, he then reveals himself as the god of magic, as the god of nature, the magic of nature, which is very elemental. So I think that's what happens when we start to integrate all these different aspects of ourselves from wherever they may be found. The mirror of darkness and the mirror of light.
Yes.
Until we shatter the mirror completely.
Yeah, and in Gnosticism, this is explained as when they talk about the different Gospels and about the Bible, about, for example, the ocean being split or Christ walking on water. Is this water again was a symbolic representation of these animalistic forces that work in us, and these, by mastery over this, being able to walk on top of it, means that that we become aware of them and conscious of them. And if we are aware and conscious of them, we walk upon it. We don't sink into the water, which I think at a certain point even happened. I think it was Moses who stepped on the water and then he sank, and Jesus had to pull him out again. It was just he was sorry,
Peter.
Yeah, actually, and Peter actually was getting to this mastery, this level of realization, of God realization, but then he fell back into his needs, into his animalistic needs, and Christ pulled him out again. He showed him the way again, and it's all symbolic within the Gnostic description. But it shows us that the only way to be able to conquer them, or to not be controlled by these animalistic nature, is by facing them, by accepting them. And I think when we really look at what's happening in the world right now, when it comes to COVID, when it comes to whatever is happening right now, the wars, etc., what I see is that a lot of people are not willing to believe what's really happening.
We take sides, we get into judgments and fear.
Yeah, and some people say, well, this is all set up, and there's this world government, etc., which is a way of not, again, putting it outside of yourself, again,
it's a
putting
truth,
it
but
out
not
there.
The only truth, and it's not the ultimate truth.
Yeah, and other people are saying this can't be true. It can't be that governments are trying to control us, etc., which I think is the other extreme, which is also kind of weird, because since before Roman times, history shows us that governments have been screwing us over and over and over again. So, I mean, to think that they will never do that is, again, I think, a little bit a strange concept. But what's really going on here is that these forces that are inside us are reflected in society. And they're trying to win our attention and how do we respond to it?
So let's continue that theme, because I know that this is something that I struggle with, that many others struggle with. It's like, okay, so I'm here on this planet to make a difference. I'm not just here to live my own life and, dream it away. So how do I make that difference in this world? Part of, I cannot be in denial. So, there are those of us who would like to basically hide our head in the sand like ostriches and pretend none of it is happening because it's easier not to. It's safer not to.
Yeah.
You don't want to draw attention to yourself. Or you're afraid to speak your truth. You're afraid of what others might think and judge. And, and we've lived in this kind of collective fear in this COVIDian era for the last 3 years, including all the wars that get fought around these issues. All right, so I'm here to make a difference. I watch all this happening. I understand the truth of what's going on beyond what we are told in the media. And I get angry. I get trigger happy. I get and sometimes I get to feeling really helpless and hopeless. So I can't deny any of that. And yet at the same time, how do I use that to go? So this is the dualistic perspective. How do I break out of that into the non-dual perspective while not going into denial or going into some kind of transcendence, which isn't embodied here on this earth?
Yeah,
it's a big question.
It is a big question, and I think what's really important right now is to do the work and to go inside and to try to find that part of us that is the same in everyone, and that is this edgeless awareness that in which everything appears. And when we can touch on that and we have a conversation, and let's say that we don't agree, or I'm afraid or you're afraid in that conversation, if we know that behind that fear is the same eyes, the same awareness looking at that fear from the inside, then from my perspective, then the perspective changes and the separation disappears, because we realize, oh, there's a program running here. And that's when love can flow, because then there's understanding. Then the other becomes yourself. Ah, you're me. I know this.
So that's like a family constellation in a sense. Okay, so there's Joe Biden out there, and here's Joe Biden and me. There's Ursula von der Leyen over there, and there she is in me. Yeah. There's Zelensky there, Putin, whoever is in the drama, Fauci, Bill Gates, they're all here, and they're doing this family constellation thing.
Yeah.
It's not easy to.
It's not easy, but I think, if we go back to ISSA or the Christ, he said, I am the Father and the Father is within me, and only through me, the Father, you will reach the kingdom of heaven. And I think with that, he meant only through this journey within, that is not really within, because it's like we said, it's this thing unfolding itself and imploding at the same time. This inner space that we have is edgeless, it encompasses everything. But by going there we can all meet each other. That's the kingdom of heaven. That's where the Father is. That's where you find Shiva. That's where you find your true spark, or meta consciousness, as whatever you call it. And from that perspective, everybody is in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. Yeah. Then we can ask the question, how do we do this? But only.
Well, isn't that what alchemy is about?
I think. I think that's the process. Going within and transmuting what is seen without.
Right. I'm also very impressed by the work of what's his name, the Power versus Force guy. can't think of his name at the moment, but he talks about the scale of consciousness from 0 to 1000.
Ah, yes, yes.
What's the guy's name?
I don't remember, but he uses
It'll come.
kinesiology to test
Yeah.
where people are. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Right.
interesting.
And one thing I like about that is that, he talks about the scale. It starts with guilt and shame and, fear and repression and aggression and anger. Then you come to a neutral space around 200 on the scale. Then you start moving up into the higher realms. It starts with trust, courage, and then you move into joy, into love, into enlightenment states. But the thing about this is that it's a logarithmic scale. So if you're vibrating at, say, 100 on the scale, you're still stuck in this fear, games, and manipulation, mind control stuff. And everything out there is, seen in a very dualistic sense. I'm a victim, they're the oppressors, and I'm going to rise up and, either I'm going to cower back in fear or I'm going to overcome and exchange roles, but it still keeps that perpetrator victim cycle going. Once we start moving up, though, to 300, 400, 500 and up, it's logarithmic in the sense that one person vibrating at, say, 300 can balance out a dozen people at 200. One person at 400 can balance out 100 people. One person at 500 balances out 1,000 people. So, you see how that logarithmic scale starts. So you get to states of equanimity, true equanimity. I'm not talking about detachment where everything has become separate from you, but a true sense of inclusiveness. Then you get to that point where just holding space, just being with what is, recognizing, witnessing that everything is inside you, all these forms of, all these oppositional forms are actually an aspect of you. At that point, there's something that happens where that internal state of consciousness starts to ripple out. And you start to, that frequency is strong enough that it can affect and influence the entire collective. And so I think this is where the yogis and the mystics and the alchemists operated from. It wasn't in denial. It wasn't about pretending that there's no conflicts going on, pretending that that this is all illusion, but coming to a state where the divine focus has become so internalized that you've transcended the state of duality, where everything is seen as Shiva or an aspect of Shakti, in which case then that steadiness of being ripples out. And there's a presence in that which can infiltrate into the globalist collective in a way that nothing else can. Because at that point, you're not blaming, you're not suppressing, you're not fighting, you're not even judging, because you see that as an aspect of yourself and you're courageous enough that you're willing to see it. And then gradually it transforms by itself. You're not trying to do anything because it's impossible for the personal self to do that on its own. But then you're opening to the state of grace. And, Sophia, Shakti, Durga, this state of grace then comes through the mother. And that's where transformation happens, because there's Sri Aurobindo talks about the involutionary and the evolutionary aspects of divinity. The evolutionary aspects is we are identified with the world of matter. We are finding our way back into unity with source. The involutionary aspect is where source is experiencing itself in diversity, experiencing itself in all this multiplicity of forms and emotions and experiences. It's all perfect, it's as it's meant to be. But when the evolutionary and involutionary come into merging with each other, then a new evolutionary force is unleashed. When they're opposing each other, that's when we separate from ourselves. And I think more and more it's like, we're finding our place in this. You're having these beautiful states of feeling at one with all the states of emotion, all the lives and experiences that you encounter. And there's no judgment, or there's no judgment about the judgment, rather, because initially I think we're still very much caught up in the human drama, where the first reaction is always going to be, tightness or contraction. And then there's a loosening up, letting go, a reflection, embracing, integration. And at that point, you become, that 800, 900, 1000 on a scale of consciousness, where you as a Christed being or enlightened person can begin to just experience a state of interbeingness, which is what alchemy truly is about.
And I really think that that's where the answer lies, because if I look at what's been happening lately, and whether it's about COVID or war or what's happening with farmers over the world right now, the red thread that I've seen is that people are being divided over ideas. Not because you're part of this group or that group, or you're a hippie or you're this or that. No, it's even families get divided, and groups with similar ideas and similar clothing styles, etc. Communities get divided over concept, over ideas, even within own community, within families, within your own safety. And this creates loneliness. People feel alone. I don't think people have felt this alone for a long time. But what happens when people feel alone? They start to long for community. They start to long to be together. And this longing, this comes from the heart. And I think this is where you make the point, is that this longing will start pouring out, and people will find each other again, maybe in different structures than we're used to, but they will find each other eventually, because I think loneliness is the biggest disease of this society, and there's only one way to fight it, and that is oneness. It's the opposite of loneliness. We need to move to oneness to get through past this loneliness. And
interesting that in the English language, alone, if you split it, becomes all one. So one is isolation and one is unity. Depends on our perceptions.
Yes, exactly. And the difference between everybody is only visible in the world, in external events. You look different, you have a different color, you have a different clothing style, you have a different gender, you have etc. And I think this is changing somehow,
And the way it's changing, ironically, is by experiencing the extremes. Which is something that's happening especially in the United States now. With I won't go into details, but I think people know what I'm talking about. It's like, we have created so many extreme divisions, whether it has to do with gender, whether it has to do with ideology. And those extremes, once you go all the way out to the very edge, there's no place you can go beyond that. You have to turn back. And once you start turning back towards center, having experienced the extremes, you're immune.
It's like a pendulum that moves from one side to the other.
Exactly. Yes.
And as long as we keep feeding energy to it, the pendulum will keep swinging and keep swinging. and keep swinging.
Yeah. So that's the only choice we have, whether we're going to feed energy into the pendulum or just allow it to find its still point.
Yeah.
And we don't have to make it come to a still point. We just have to stop feeding the pendulum.
Do you know the principle of entrainment?
Same old.
Where you have these, for example, these, they use it in the metronomes that they use in music, and they have a room full of metronomes, and they swing these arms, and they all move in a different frequency. One goes tick tock, tick, the other goes tick, tick, tick. But if you wait long enough, all the metronomes in that room, no matter how they were initiated, they will all start ticking in the same frequency. You know, and exactly. I think this is where we're going. We have to. We are like metronomes. We will at a certain point all be starting to vibrate in the same frequency. And of course, somebody gives a swing every now and then, but then it takes time. But we will all go back into that because it seems to be a natural law. That's everything.
I think that's the key. If it's a natural law, then it's inevitable.
Exactly.
You know, if it's not, then we're going to, keep going with the imbalances. Yeah. But because it is a natural, I mean, that's what you talked about earlier, coming to 0 point. This is, the emptiness of Shiva and the fullness of Shakti. So each of us, the very essence of our being is that emptiness. And that emptiness manifests in every possible way as this divine Shakti, creating all opposites, all possibilities, all experiences, because that's the nature of this dance. It's not that, God is invested in good versus bad. It's like there's a creativity that doesn't even define things as good or bad. It's just an expression. Night and day, cold and heat. Like many of the indigenous cultures and shamanic cultures never speak about positive and negative, good and bad. They simply speak about either things are in flow or somehow you're resisting that flow. So when you spoke about the heart, what comes to me is that listening to the heart is about surrendering to the flow. Because our natural tendency, or at least a natural conditioned tendency, is to resist the flow. Yes. And that's what creates all the imbalances and the suffering and the chaos.
Yeah. Well, I even think that if we're all in chaos, even chaos can be a flow. It's just a flow that we don't want to, from the separate perspective. A lot of people talk about, I want synchronicity in my life. I want flow in my life. Well, if everything goes wrong one day after the other, that's synchronicity, because you're in a place where you don't want to be, and all this stuff happens that you don't want to happen. So it's just the expression of your inner states that's being manifested in within your awareness, in which the external world seems to appear.
Yeah, so, it's like you're thinking about what's going on in your personal life, and it's certainly one of those trigger points, which could appear to be very like a crumbling kind of chaos. But from that, there's something that's arising. You don't know what that is yet, but
it is a flow in itself, and just an unwanted flow, I think. And I think this is where we maybe go full circle in how we started this conversation as well. Once you realize who you really are and what your true nature is, and you realize this Shiva nature, the Father or God that is within us, and you see that everything just happens, and that the person that you think you are is not even responsible for this, because it's just an accumulation of beliefs and conditioning, etc. You become in a state where you think, I'm lost. I cannot do anything about it. There's no ambition to change this. It's perfectly fine the way it is, and there's nothing going on. And like I said before, for me, it almost feels like some sort of impotence, because if you don't change anything, then a lot of people can suffer from this, because let's face it, there are people suffering. There are people who are so invested in their own person and that they feel miserable. And I think the first step that to really make something out of this is accepting that we are lost, but knowing that our heart can function as a compass. That's the spark of light that we have, you know. And if we realize that we're all metronomes ticking, and most metronomes are ticking without any sense of wanting and what frequency they need to tick or they want to tick, but there's just a few out there that very consistently keep ticking, and they know. And this is, I think, what you talked about, these people on the logarithmic scale that really pour out this intention from the heart into the world, then all the other metronomes will start ticking in that same rhythm. And
right. Yeah, if it's a strong enough rhythm, then everything will then train to that.
it's persistent, and it just goes, because the frequency comes not from a separate self that is being affected like a leaf on the river. No, it is, the frequency comes from within, and is not affected by what is happening outside, because it's a persistent stream of love, as you might call it.
Yeah, well, it comes from that still point with them.
Yes, exactly.
And that still point is love.
Exactly.
You know, and the problem is that for many of us, because of our conditioning, we go around seeking for love. We've made a transaction out of it. Am I receiving enough? Am I giving enough? Most of our relationships are based on that, rather than experiencing myself as love. And once I know that, once I know who I am as love, then I'm immune to all the transactional quality of what substitutes for relationship.
That's why we hurt, I think, when we lose somebody, because if somebody dies, for example, we really feel that love for that person, but that love no longer has a place to land. There's no object where you can send that love to. And there's also that way, the love doesn't reach you through the other anymore. And you feel almost deprived of something because that person moved on. But this is a selfish act.
Yeah. Well, as you say that, I'm reflecting on my mother, who died a couple of months ago. And it's like, you know, we've had our issues and our stuff, personal stuff in our relationship. But, you know, what I realized, well, after she died, there were like, you know, every day I was in tears, just breaking open my heart. Much of it came from regrets. The sadness came from regrets rather than from really missing her. Because once I could go through those regrets, I realized that there's no way that I could ever lose her. Exactly. Because what I was thinking that I was losing was what was incomplete in our relationship. And once I could let go of that and just recognize that, it started, you know, the tears became the gateway for a deep integration process. And at that point, I felt like I could just go out. I could feel her where she was, traveling out into different bardos and states of consciousness, and, you know, return to her own innocence. And where there was sadness just became this tenderness. And
it is really interesting, because it's such an intensity you speak about. You have to open your heart for it. But we talked a couple of times now about our true nature, where we go beyond this person or what we perceive as this person, and knowing that we are all this divine awareness that is behind. It's not really behind, but that pervades everything. Same goes for your mother. So your mother, the way you perceive her as the person that she was, with the name that she was, is a collection of ideas and experiences and everything like that. And there was regrets there, and there's a missing there. But basically what you were doing with that point is honoring yourself, honoring that which is inside you as well. And shouldn't we do the same thing with what's happening in the world right now? Because we have a sense that the old world that we're used to is dying, and we're losing this, and we're feeling all these pain and all these regrets and everything that goes around it. But shouldn't we just open up and accept it, you know? And even if it means that everything goes to hell, so to say, and everything destroys and everything dies out, in a sense, from that perspective, that's fine too, you know?
That's the key, isn't it, Ingmar? I mean, we have to get to the point where it doesn't matter, truly doesn't matter. I mean, yes, from a, you know, as a human being who's chosen to be here at this time on this planet, I have a purpose, or I think I have a purpose, which is to restore a sense of unity and beauty on this planet, to reconnect the different species that have been rent asunder, to bring humanity back into its heart. But if it doesn't happen, it's okay. And if I can really get to that point where it's truly okay, not because it's a failure, you know, because if I don't fulfill this sense of purpose, in the past, I've seen that as failure. I've failed my mission. I've lost something. But is it truly, you know, if nothing can happen outside of infinite consciousness, it's only a perception of failure.
Yeah.
And then what is left is the trust that even if I can't see what or why or how long something has to take, there's perfection in each step of the way, not just at the end, not just at the end of the journey, but every step of the way. Yes. The journey is the destination.
And I think trust is a word. I like trust much better than hope.
Yeah. Yeah, hope is too often identified as hopium. You know, I wish, I hope. But
I think with hope, you give your power away. With trust, you claim power.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you trust in is the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Or trust in God, trust in grace, trust in oneness.
Yeah. And that's where the difference is between a dualistic way of perception and a unified way of perception. Because from a dualistic way, whether it's, you know, the illusion of the Vedantic tradition where this world is illusion and only the infinite is real, or the dualism of many traditions where there's good versus evil, or whatever it may be, our own life experiences where we create longings based on something is being attached to something or being averse to something else. All these they take away from trust.
Yes.
Because then it's based on what I can control, what I think I can control, which I believe is good for me or for the world, which I've given my power to. And there's a meme I found on my Facebook page once, the one Zen monk saying to another, relax, nothing is under control. And it's like that, you know, when you intentionally let go of control, it's different from fatalism.
Yes.
When you intentionally let go of control, trusting that there's something much more going on than I'm aware of at the moment.
Yeah, letting go of control of the things you cannot control, you know, because there are things in your life that you can change, and this is, you can make a choice to be loving. You can make a choice where to put my awareness, where do I put my center of attention? Will I put it there, or will I put it there, on the left or on the right? So I think that is, there we have a power to make a difference.
Absolutely. And even that is not the personal self choosing where to go with it. You know, at this point,
it's
it's
the
like
heart, the compass.
Yeah. exactly.
Yes.
So the heart, I would imagine then, is where the personal and the universal aspects of self come together.
Yes.
Um, because even to talk about it is like I'm speaking from a level of, you know, the mind dividing, discerning, you know, but when it becomes one stream, one flow, I'm not making any distinction between personal or universal. And I think this is where a lot of religions have trouble. A lot of spiritual traditions have trouble because we've created so much of an idea of divinity or God or Shakti or Shiva or right and wrong and good and bad and all these things, dark and light. Because these ideas are not what is. These ideas are simply ideas. Like you said earlier, you know, as soon as a child starts to label a tree as birch or as
Exactly.
hollyhock, then you don't experience the tree. You just see that as something outside of you.
Exactly. There's the separation. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a really good joke. They say, like, yeah, reality as we perceive it, it's all an illusion. So better not pay attention. But there's this saying, well, the illusionary elephant will chase you up the illusionary tree, or it will kill your illusionary self. So,
Mm.
are you going to climb the tree or not? You will climb the tree.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we still have to deal with this illusion, because the illusion itself, the experience, is real to
Mm.
us.
Yeah.
The question is, can we see it for what it really is?
Mm. Yeah. And I think the closest a lot of people come to that is lucid dreams,
Hmm.
where you're dreaming, you become aware that you're dreaming, and you discover that you have control
Yeah.
in the dream, and that every part of the dream is actually part of you because you are dreaming, you are the dreamer. So
Yeah.
the bad guy chasing you in the dream is part of you.
Yeah.
You know, the tree that you climb to escape from the bad guy is also a part of you.
And then if you're aware of this dream and you're aware of the dreaming, then
Mm.
who makes the choices, and where do the choices come from? What do you base the
Yeah.
choices on that you make? And then I
Right.
think, again, we end up at the heart,
Mhm.
being this compass that we
Mhm.
all have, which is the center of the cross of the Christ. And the Rosicrucians have the rose blooming in the center of the
Mhm.
cross, which is the heart opening, literally
Mhm.
breaking the
Yeah. Yeah.
seal, they say in Buddhism. Huh?
Right. Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it all comes back to the heart.
I think so. Yeah.
And ultimately, it's about, you know, like you said earlier, breaking open the heart, which is so painful and yet at the same time so liberating.
I'd like to, I'm gonna check. I found a quote somewhere and I pasted it on my Facebook, and I'm gonna try to find it. And I think it's a nice way to end uh, this conversation. And it's about the heart and about breaking the heart.
Mm.
But I'm not sure if I can find it, if I even posted it. Maybe I didn't, actually. Well, if I don't find it, I will add it to this video for sure as a nice ending. But it was about we have to have our heart broken over and over again, because it's the only way to feel it and to keep it flowing and to keep the love flowing. So yeah, no, I cannot find it right now, but I'll add it. I'll add it to the video. Yeah.
Hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, I was trying to find something. Okay, I'm lost again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, okay. Okay, good. So did you find that quote?
I could not find it, not on my Facebook. Maybe I put it on my Instagram, which might be the
Okay.
last. I will check right now, and if not, then I'll just add it to the video and
Yeah, great.
leave it.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. You know, there's such a beautiful flow to this. It started off just the two of us talking, and then we decided to make this into a conversation that could be shared.
Yeah,
And because I do feel like we're going, each of our journeys belongs to all of us. And so there's nothing that any of us are going through that is unique to ourselves. So your struggles, your adventures, your breakthroughs belong to all of us, and vice versa.
it does. Yeah.
So it's nice how we could bring together the different worldviews also. And, going all the way back to the beginning of the circle, we were talking about Kashmir Shaivism and ISSA. So this is something I've been researching for a long time, for the last 10 years at least. It actually started off in the south of France. I was visiting some people in Toulouse, and I'd just come back from visiting some of the Qatar relics, Montségur and the others.
I just visited them last week. All the castles, Montségur, Kiribus, all the fortresses that they have there.
Great. What a history.
A lot of
Yeah. And
climbing.
that's when somehow it's like I got interested in understanding the life of Jesus in his Eastern journeys. And also, of course, Mary Magdalena, who came to France, who was part of the whole Qatar tradition, the formation of that, and then a journey up into England, and then Isa, or Jesus, returning simultaneously back to Kashmir through Persia and different parts of India and Lanka, as it was known then, and up in Tibet, and then met his teachers who were immortal yogis, and the adventures. This is something that few people really know about. So in that exploration, I also got in touch with Kashmir Shaivism.
Nice.
Because it's that's the whole, we could talk about this another time, but it's such an incredible story which needs to be told. And
I think
so I
so
wrote a
too.
book about this called ISSA, Son of the Sun. It's ready to be published now. So sooner or later it'll be out. But it's a story. So the reason I say that is because I also find that his story is also our story. It's not just that Jesus is somehow separate from the rest of us as a perfected Son of God. His journey is the journey of our own perfection as we come to terms with and come to unity within ourselves. So
Yes, and it lived on as well here, because when Jesus as Isa went to Kashmir, and I really think he went there because before knowing that about your book, or even that Jesus might have been there, I knew that there was so much overlap with Kashmir Shaivism. And here in France, in the south of France, the troubadours came. They were the first here. The troubadours came from this area, and they all sang about this. And they actually took this information they apparently also from Kashmir, from India, etc. And they spread it through Europe. So that's the whole circle is round.
Yeah.
Well, let's end it here, Kiara.
All right. Yeah.
Less than a
So
minute.
thank you, Ingmar, and let's continue
We
another
will.
time. You can
All
set a
right.
date. Make it happen.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Blessings. Thank you.
Bye.